Elizabeth Townsend. This is for Dean Massaro's Preparing for Live project. This is an interview with Perry Rogers. April 8th, 2002. All right, our first question. Why did you go to law school, and was it what you expected when you got there?
Yeah, okay. I went to law school because I wanted to have a legal background. I knew that I didn't want to practice law. Even when I showed up here, I knew that I wasn't going to practice law, at least for a career. I thought I might do it for a couple years so that I could experience it.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, I wanted to be able to understand the thought process that in which lawyers engage. And I wanted to also make sure that in business I wasn't left with a disadvantage, which is, there are so many elements in my job where my legal education is incredibly helpful. And I was kind of guessing at that, and I was kind of informed of that. My dad had said, no matter what you do, get a legal education. And to a certain extent, I was guessing, which is, okay, I think that he's right. It turns out that he absolutely was right. And so that's why I came to law school.
How did that influence what you took here and how you approached, because everyone else around you wasn't going in that direction. I mean, there are a lot of people who are just main track.
I think it made it easier for me because I didn't find law school as much of a competitive environment as I think a lot of my colleagues did. I wasn't the book on every exam, and while I was on law review, it wasn't critical to law review. So I got to enjoy law review more, I think, than most. I think that my legal education was a rather enjoyable process.
And if someone who wanted to go into business instead, there are specific things you would suggest that they do that they wouldn't necessarily know in terms of law school, things to think about as they're going through?
I think that they should really focus on civil procedure, and I think they should really focus on contracts. At least those are the two things that have meant the most to me. I need to know what the legal process is going to entail if I am going to go after somebody, and I need to know what all of my options are within an agreement, so that I can, one, make sure that it's written or drafted as best as possible, and two, if I find myself in an agreement that isn't necessarily beneficial to my client, what options that I have inside of the agreement itself.
And since you work, let me ask you a question. In terms of, your dad had said something about when we interviewed, who's in charge, who's making the painting, kind of, there's only one captain. Working with your clients, and you have a team and other people, and there would, I imagine, other lawyers.
Yes.
How does that relationship work? Since you do have a legal background in how does that sort of, the relationship work? Are you telling them things that you see, or
yes.
How does that?
Well, he's right. I'm the only one painter, and I'm lucky because I have two clients that, allow me to do my work, and I let them do their work. They're great in their field, and they let me do what I do in my field. I think that if you're going to go into business, you're going to find that you are constantly negotiating, and you're going to find that no matter how much you try to avoid it, there are going to be disputes that arise. By having a legal background, when those disputes arise, you're part of the problem-solving process. That's critical because what it means is the goal is to run your company a certain way. By having the legal background, when you run into a legal issue, you don't just turn the problem over to someone and say, call me and let me know how it goes. You are ingrained in each phase, each step, and each element of it. You're critical in the analysis of it, and you're the best fact bearer that exists in the process because you're trying to talk about what was understood by the parties. So it is a very good way of continuing the process of making sure that your company looks and acts the way you want it to.
we should talk. Dean Massaro would really love us to talk about the differences between negotiating and the other sorts of things. Do you have a favorite? Do you like a favorite part of like if negotiation versus arbitration versus litigation, or is it they're just so different that there isn't a sort of favorite?
Well, there is a favorite. For me, I enjoy negotiating. I mean, we have arbitrated cases. We're in the middle of litigating some cases, and that process is very different than negotiating. Negotiating is my favorite because I enjoy its subtleties. It's a very subtle science, and it is a science. I mean, it's part art because you have to have a sense. You have to really have a great deal of empathy to be a good negotiator, because you have to always know how another person feels about what's occurring in the room. And it's also a science because you have to be able to support your arguments with real numbers, at least in what I do, because what I'm negotiating are business contracts, and it isn't enough to say, geez, I think this person has a great deal of value. You know, it is a science because I have to support them with whether it's Q scores or true scores. I'm going to have to actually sit down and talk about how my client reaches into a specific demographic and has a specific impact on specific people, and how that will drive sales. So that's the science part of it. It isn't purely a science, and it's not purely an art. It's that mix, and I enjoy the subtleties, and I enjoy how fast everything happens. My experience with, whether it's arbitration or litigation, and arbitration is really just a faster version of litigation, faster, more informal version of litigation, is that those processes are just painfully slow for my personality.
In what way?
Well, it's painfully slow because, one, you're dealing with someone else's schedule, and in a negotiation, you really are dealing with one other party's schedule, which is nice. Whereas in an arbitration or litigation, you're dealing with several people's schedules. You're dealing with a backlog that will exist either for the arbitration panelists or the judges themselves. So that's every schedule that's involved. And so your sense of conclusion or finality for the issue is at least thwarted as far as time is concerned by other people's lives. Negotiation is just you and I sitting down and having a conversation, and it's then the subtleties of how to persuade and how to do so effectively, because there is a result that you can reach that people view as a win that isn't necessarily a win, and understanding that distinction is...
Explain that.
Well, it's a business deal. It is not a settlement. Most of my negotiations are business deals that enter into a relationship. And what you have to know is that the burden on the negotiators is greater than achieving a specific goal. It's, let's say the number is $1 million, okay? If I get that $1 million and you and I have entered into negotiation, and at the end of the day you feel beaten up by the process, we're now going to have to live together with you feeling beaten up. So what looks like a win initially is an enormous loss. Kind of guarantee that throughout this relationship there will be things that I will need, and there will be things that you will want. And if I need things and you feel beaten up, now I've created a relationship that is difficult at best. So the goal, though, is not to then number that necessarily you can just accept, because that's not negotiating. That's just averaging. Averaging is easy. You want to pay 0, I want $1 million. Let's settle on $500,000. Okay, that's easy. Anyone can do that. The difficulty in negotiating is getting to the $1 million, but making sure that you feel good about the process. Persuading you enough where you actually walk out of the room with a smile on your face. I mean, the real measure for success is whether or not both people have a smile on their face at the end of the day. And that's part of my job, and that's why I say empathy is an enormous part of my job, because I have to understand how you feel at all times.
What happens when the other side doesn't really understand the game? Is it harder then? I mean,
it is harder. You always want the smartest people possible in the room with you. That is critical. When they don't understand the game, your job is to spend more time explaining it and to be clear about what the rules are. There are times when you'll get into a room with someone that believes that the goal is to beat each other up. And you need to very quickly control the situation. Negotiating ultimately is really about one thing: managing expectations. And the person that manages the expectations wins.
how do you do? I mean, I was in negotiating class, and our negotiating thing, our exercise was a disaster. And in part it was because the other side wasn't really prepared, and also
Right.
because they got really stubborn and they were insecure. So, like, when we tried to explain to them, like, what we were supposed to be doing, even though maybe we weren't as nice as we should have been, everything fell apart.
Right. Well, that's part of the key. I mean, in those times, you have to dig down deeper and be even nicer, and you have to be even more forthright. You have to sense insecurity. You have to sense uncertainty, and you have to figure out how you're going to create a stable, certain environment with someone that doesn't necessarily feel that way. So sometimes it's as simple as calling a break to everything, going out to lunch, talking about who you are as a person, what your value system is, telling them about your children, about your wife, about what your ultimate goals are in life, what value you put on things. It's really about backing people out of it and creating some humanity there, because again, if it's just a science, you're going to be left too often with someone unhappy, and then you're left with a relationship.
Do you feel like when some people, I mean, depending on who's coming to you, that you're in a position where there's an intimidation factor, that they're coming to you as sort of the big time, like this is their big moment, and that influences how people, I mean, obviously you deal with big corporations and big people, but sometimes you might deal with littler people. And how is that different when you're dealing with a big corporation that can deal with things versus a smaller, or is it doesn't have anything to do with
Yeah,
size?
it's not really had an impact. I mean, I clearly watched people that were more nervous than others in the room, and generally the more sophisticated negotiators aren't very nervous. There have been some that have been really nervous, but they get over it quickly. And again, my job is to get them out of that nervous feeling, because what you would think is I can back them up here. I've got them nervous. The problem is that you're just not going to be able to accomplish everything with the requisite trust if you take advantage of that. Look, it's not to say that there aren't times that you hammer people, because there are times that I don't mind if we walk out of the room with one person upset. There are times when I don't mind putting it to people. It's to say that you have to take each situation and examine, what is this relationship going to look like going forward? How much are we going to have to live together? How much are we going to rely on each other? And you can't undersell that, and you can't underestimate how important that is. And so that's when you have to spend the requisite time. And then there are other times you just can't convince someone of approaching it with all of the forthrightness that you hope for. And you have to live within that dynamic and negotiate from there.
Sorry.
And I've had that happen. I mean, I've had people, as much as I've tried to talk about partnership, not want to accept it, not want to accept it, not want to accept it. And, I think that those times have been interesting, because I think that they've damaged their clients' interests to an enormous extent for not wanting to open up more and try to understand how it can be viewed in a more holistic sense.
How long do negotiating sessions last for you? Is it different varying, or is it?
Completely varies. There are deals that I've done that have been done in literally 5 minutes, and for a good amount of money. But that's because there's a history with the person. There's also a history with, let's say for Andre, let's say it's a guarantee to play in a tournament. Those deals are easy to do because the marketplace is well established, and there's also a history with a specific tournament director. So you call up and say, you know, say I'm talking about Ivan Blumberg, who runs some tournaments. Ivan, let's do this. Here's how we'll do the increase. And he says, yeah, that's fine. That makes sense to me. Then there are other negotiations that have taken more than a year to complete and get incredibly complex, probably more than they need to be. It just depends on from where everyone starts and to where everyone is going.
Did you, we talk a lot about mistakes and things like that, especially starting out. You sit there, you look perfect to students who feel totally not perfect. Do you ever make mistakes, either when you were younger or now, where you suddenly say something and you realize that wasn't what you wanted to say, and how do you get out of it? Are there mistakes? How do you deal with mistakes that you make yourself when you go through, when you're...
Well, I think most of the mistakes that I make are they're not so much what I say, because those are easy to fix. You can say, I just misstated that. I'm sorry, I meant to say X. Mm-hmm. Again, in a negotiation, you're not going to be held to the record. You're going to be held to your integrity and your honesty. So if you honestly say, you know what, that was a misstatement. I meant to say X and not Y. Those are easy. The mistakes that you make are strategic. It's overemphasizing an element that isn't relevant. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake people make in a negotiation. It's taking what you think is important to someone else, making an assumption that it's relevant to someone else, and then negotiating about that fact. And there have been times where the mistake I've made in the room is that I have tried to persuade someone of a position that I thought they wouldn't agree with, but that I thought I could persuade them on, only to realize that I had spent capital in the room on an issue that they would have already agreed with me on. And that's the stuff that you really kick yourself for, because you realize there's only so much capital each person has in the room, and I've just spent it on something that they would have agreed with that anyways.
Explain what you mean by only so much capital.
Well, each person comes to the room with a certain amount of capital, and the capital is determined by the amount of need that exists on each side. Mm-hmm. Not wants, the amount of need. Wants are portions that you put into an agreement after the needs are met, but each side comes into it with the need. So let's suppose that you want to launch an advertising campaign with one of my clients, okay? And let's suppose that your advertising agency has told you that the attributes that you're trying to articulate to the consumer are uniquely and only defined by my client. Okay, so you walk into the room with an incredible need. Okay, now I don't know that. I walk into the room with more of a with a tougher to define need. Yours is hard and it's fast. Mine is, it could be more money, and I need to make sure that I do the best for my clients. But you as an organization might not be the best for my clients. You might sell a product that they inherently disagree with. You might sell a product that's inferior in nature. You might be a company that doesn't have a good brand image. So my needs in that situation are not as concrete as yours. What that means is I have more political capital in the room than you do. Or I shouldn't say political, I have more negotiating capital than you do. Okay? My job is to spend the first moments of the negotiation trying to understand your needs. Your job is to try to understand mine, so that you can understand how much you have to play with, and I can understand how much I have to play with. So we come to the room in that sense with different capital. Now let's reverse it. You're a company, well established, Microsoft, okay, and you're going to start to create Xbox games. And my client needs to be in that space, needs to have a video game, because if they're not, they'll be perceived as not being a leader in their industry and marketing that industry. Okay. Now the roles are reversed. You're well established. Your brand, Microsoft will be here tomorrow, no matter what, and the day after that. And so now you have some capital that I don't have, and it's understanding that capital, and then me trying to make sure that as we go along in this dialogue, I convince you that our capital is closer together than you think. Your job is to try and convince me that our capital is not close together, that yours is much greater than mine. That's what the game is.
How did you learn the game?
Well, I was lucky. I think my dad is, I've seen a lot of great negotiators. I really have. I've been really lucky, but I don't think there's anybody that touches my dad. And so I was raised around him, and I saw him do it all the time, and I kind of learned it just by being around it.
Did you see him doing things like business stuff when you were a kid?
Yes, because he was a lawyer who then started television stations, or bought some TV stations, and I was watching him deal with the different issues that existed from both of those, and I enjoyed watching all of that. And he would articulate to me, well, here's what I'm working on, and I really enjoyed his thought process, and I was always impressed, most importantly, with how prepared he was. He really knew where he wanted to go, and he really spent a lot of time, an enormous amount of time, understanding the other side's point of view. An enormous amount of time.
That's interesting. So if you don't have a dad like yours, how do you think like regular students who, particularly those who don't really have a lot of negotiating background in their family, how do they learn how to do it? Because it's really tricky.
But you do it every day, and that's the great thing about it. We do it in everything we do. We do it with our significant others, with our friends. We do it when we're going to make a major purchase like a car. You're negotiating all the time. And we do it with ourselves. We negotiate with ourselves, as a matter of fact. I think the key to practicing negotiating is to really work on your skills of empathy. And I think the way to do that is to really spend time in every available situation, actually looking around the room and saying, how are they perceiving what is going on right now? What's my prediction for what they think? And then going to the next phase of predicting what you think someone will say in a conversation based on their behavior patterns. If you can start to have those little exercises with yourself in your own head, where you're saying, I'll bet you that if I said this, they would respond this way, knowing what I now know about them, you're starting to understand how negotiating works. Because that's really what it is. It's an action and response exercise. And if you could start to do that with yourself and see how good you are at predicting behavior, I think that too many people get lost in their own argument, and what people need to know most importantly is that we all believe our own argument. We all believe our own argument. That's kind of the whole point of why we come to the table. I have yet to sit across from a lawyer that says to me, everything I'm about to tell you, I don't believe it. Of course they believe in what they say. So our belief that, but I believe mine more passionately, or I'm better at articulating it, that belief system is going to do nothing but get you into trouble in every negotiation that you ever enter. Because that's not the issue that exists. It's not, where you have a judge that's going to say, I listen to your argument, and I listen to yours, and I like yours better.
Now that happened, that was part of the problem in our class, that was sort of where they sort of stood is, I care more about our client than you care about yours kind of thing. What do you do when...
You acknowledge how much they care. You get it off the table. And you let them know, I'm telling you, your passion is absolutely admirable. And I hope that you understand that I have just as much passion. You need to let them know that their passion is important, but that it's not relevant.
So do you think that negotiating can be taught, like at schools? I mean, should they be teaching classes and doing more negotiating? Or?
I do. I don't think, I think that people are too quick to believe that there's just this innate ability. I think that it is something that you learn. I've watched people in my office get much better at it. I've watched them understand how versatile their personalities need to become and how they really work at adapting their personalities. That's impressed me. I've watched people's personalities become more varied. And if that can happen, then you can learn to negotiate.
So if you could have a magic wand and make the perfect negotiating for law school, like a program, what would that entail? Would it just be a class? Would it be?
No, it would. The best thing you can do, I think, are case study exercises. I think it's getting down. Professor Silverman does it here. Where he actually takes them through. Here is the negotiating exercise. It's critical because it's where you learn your mistakes. It's where, as you say, here's what broke down with us. You start to see those things. I think those types of courses are incredibly helpful. And if you could even go so far as, I was fortunate. I got to sit in and watch a judge deal with alternative dispute resolution. And that taught me a lot, taught me a great deal. And that was part of my clerkship program here at the University of Arizona.
What about the differences in negotiating between business people and lawyers? Do you see a difference, or is that a false difference?
I do see a difference, but it's a general difference. It's stereotypical. So I don't want to oversimplify it. But the general difference that I see is that business people are better negotiators because they spend more time thinking about the end goal than about advocating their position. And lawyers are worse negotiators because they spend more time thinking about what they're going to say than listening and trying to understand what the end goal really is. That's just generally true, not always true.
All right, these are from Dean Massar. She wants, these are just quick things. We're going to talk about the difference, if it's okay, between arbitration, mediation, litigation, and sort of to begin with, why would you choose mediation or arbitration over litigation? Is there a form that you prefer, or does it depend on the problem?
It depends on the problem. As I said, we negotiate deals, we've arbitrated deals, and we're in the middle of some litigation right now. And I think that what you need to understand is that all three need to be available to you. It's a lot like your personality traits when you negotiate. The more personality traits that are available to you in a negotiation, the more successful you're going to be. Well, the more avenues for ultimate resolution that you have, the more successful that you'll be, because you will have different tools to accomplish the end goal. Litigation or arbitration are simply tools. They are means to an end, which is resolution. So for me, it's necessary that they all exist. What do I prefer? I prefer negotiation. I feel like that always gives. I think that always gives me the greatest advantage. I find that in my experience with arbitration, arbitration tends to be dividing the problem. And as I said earlier, anyone can divide the problem. I mean, if you want to pay me $0 and we want $1 million, $500,000 isn't necessarily the right answer. And my experience with arbitration has been that it does take some off each side of the edges.
Can you give me an example of when mediation or arbitration, or the differences, so that what would make like an example of why you would choose arbitration over litigation in a situation? So
yeah, generally we choose arbitration because we're trying to work through an issue quickly because we're in an agreement and we want to be able to work through the issue and get back to working for the business as a whole. So it's been the time issue, and then the other issue for my clients has been the confidential nature of the arbitration. The fact that it's so easy to keep the proceedings, the evidence, the findings confidential.
What about the other side? Is that something that encourages them not to want arbitration?
No, it's actually more important to them than it is to us.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or not.
Why?
Because generally we're in business with companies that are in this business, and if they're perceived as companies that are difficult doing business with, other athletes or entertainers won't necessarily want to gravitate toward them.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
It depends on the time of your career too. I mean, I wouldn't say that would be the case for my clients if they were young in their career. They're well established. People understand their business record. They have a good history behind them, and there is a foreseeable end to their playing days. For Andre, it might be 3 years. For Shaquille, it might be 6 or 7, maybe 8. But at the end of the day, we know that whatever companies that they're doing business with should be a going concern for a greater period than that. So they have a longer risk to that perception than my clients would have.
Explain that last part.
Well, their risk is potentially for forever. It's potential that they a bad environment, and that bad environment haunts them longer than they thought. And you would think from one deal, it can be for one deal, because they can create a dynamic with one deal that has repercussions.
It's all about reputation.
It's about, because ultimately it all is worth.
Okay, so we talked about it. Why don't you just what you do so that students later have some inkling as to what you're talking about, watching this 10 years from now or something like that.
Okay, I negotiate contracts for my 2 clients, Andre Agassi and Shaquille O'Neal, and I manage those relationships. We create at the same time a business plan designed to talk about what types of companies they'll want to get into business with, and then go about implementing it, and then make sure that we manage the assets in a way that ensures their wealth.
Okay, I've got couple questions. There's sports figures, again, for the future.
Yes.
People know that
Yes,
now.
Andre Agassi plays tennis and Shaquille O'Neal plays basketball.
For those who aren't really on the planet
right,
before.
right.
So, students who, you always have a bazillion of them who do sports law. Did you study sports law, or was that not, what that has nothing to do with it, or?
No. Law is law.
Law is law.
And negotiating is negotiating. I didn't, actually, called me and asked if I would help him. And I did, and then Shaquille called me and asked if I would help him. I did. So, I would be bad at answering any questions on how to recruit a client. I've never done it. I think I would actually stink at it.
What about business plans? Did you know how to do that from your dad? Did you learn that in law school? Did you learn that along the way?
Well, I was an accounting major at Georgetown for undergrad, and spent a lot of time at Georgetown really trying to understand, you're a general business major. Professors were always very good. Spent a lot of time in our marketing courses, and then really got inside, Nike with. Spent a lot of time asking their marketing people what they're looking for, what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, I've never thought that there was any such thing as a dumb question. Lord knows, and so, kind of having no shame about asking every question that I needed to understand what was important to Nike, what were they looking to accomplish, how did they quantify results, asking all those questions, and then trying to then make sure that we were prepared in future deals to act accordingly.
So when you were starting out and you were young and hadn't really done this very much, how did you deal with it without feeling like you were going to get taken advantage of, or make your like you want to do the best for your client, but you don't have the same experience you have now? Is that just by asking questions?
It's by asking questions. It's by being prepared. No matter how young I was, I didn't go into a negotiation unprepared. I didn't go into a negotiation guessing the market. I didn't go in guessing my numbers. I knew what the numbers were, and I spent a lot of time trying to support them.
So how did you do that? How did you prepare? I mean, what
Well,
does that mean?
the deal that I did was decreasing the amount that Andre would pay his agency, and it was just going through what they made and what their what they were valued at if you were to go out on the free market. Because you always have to remember that the marketplace is what's going to determine value. So if you are my agency and you're preparing my taxes because you have a financial division and you're writing my checks and you're drafting some agreements, what will that cost me? If I don't hire you and I want to hire someone individually to go do those elements, what will that cost? And it's when you start to add those things up and then compare that to what you're paying that you start to have to ask, please explain to me this difference. Someone needs to walk me through this. And so that was the first deal. And we were successful there, and then we just moved on from there.
Managing assets. Again, how did you feel comfortable doing that? And was that from Georgetown? Was that from, how did you feel, how did you figure out how to do that?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's spending a lot of time with the client. What are their spending habits? What are their pitfalls? Where will they run into the most problems? Given those pitfalls, what can you do now to take care of those things? You know, for an athlete, for example, it's different than most people. You know, you and I will make our money over, if we're healthy, over probably a 50-year period. You know, athletes will make their money over a 10-year period. And so it shrinks or compresses when they can make money, which means that every dollar they spend now has an enormous cost in the future. So it's really sitting down with your clients, understanding how they spend money, helping them understand the miracle of compounded interest, and putting them on a budget, which I did with Andre while I was in law school. I think in 1990 we went on a budget. And he's on one to this day. That makes sense. Then making sure that you're going to create a corpus or an amount of money that will allow them to comfortably live off their interest without having to jeopardize. So that you look at expectations. You have to look at true earning potential. You have to look at current spending. Those three elements all need to come together so that you can determine what do we need to do with our current spending to create a corpus that will allow them to meet their expectations of their life. Does that make sense? So that's what you do. Then you find the experts. So I don't just invest in Cisco or IBM. I find the best people that will do that. And you leave it to them.
We're going to jump around a little bit so we get to
fine.
other things. You talked about your dad before. Do you ever now, as you know, as an adult, do you guys your dad to talk to him about problems?
Absolutely. First of all, we probably talk 2 or 3 times a day, and we'll bounce stuff off of each other all the time. But there are times where I say, I actually need you to come over, sit down with me, and walk through this with me. He is a great resource, and whenever you find any great resource, you should tap into that as often as you can and never make it about you. I mean, the goal isn't for me to say at the end of the day, look what I did. It's to say what was accomplished. And, ultimately the decisions are mine, but I don't need to feel like I wrote every word. I need to feel like it was a collaborative process that got us the best result. He is a great person to talk to these things about. He's given me a lot of great strategies at critical times.
And do you do it the other way? Does it work? Does it go both ways?
There have been times where he's asked for my opinion,
Okay.
and Lord knows I'm always happy to solicit my opinion whether he wants it or not. And so, yeah, I think it's a great friendship that we have.
Now, I don't know much about your family, so how does the rest of your family interact with your relationship with your dad? And I mean, is it just you and your dad close, or is the rest of the family?
No, my sister Suzanne and I are close, and she's a really skilled lawyer, very bright. And we'll talk about things, bounce things off of each other. And my sister works for my dad, so clearly clearly they're dealing with each other all the time. And, you know, my mom is she is the ultimate in humanity in our family. She always makes sure that everyone is injecting humanity in, and I like that. That's her role.
That's nice. What do you think about your dad's involvement here at the law school?
Well, I think it's beyond fantastic. It's difficult to even articulate. I think he loves it. I think he gets I think he gets a lot out of it. And I think that that's important. You know, we were saying earlier that, you know, at the end of the day, both sides need to walk out of the room with a smile on their face because they're going to move forward together. And, you know, in this instance, I know that it provides an enormous amount of resources for a really great law school. And so I know that on the faculty side or on the administrative side, there's a lot of smiles on those faces saying we've got more resources, we can do more things, we can take more chances, and we can develop the school. But equally, there needs to be a big smile on his face. And, you know, it exists because he's part of the collaborative process, and he is using his vast success toward a greater good. And that makes him feel really special.
Does he get depressed over all the budget this year? Does that seem to get, or is that just part of business?
No, he doesn't function that way with problems, and I think that would hopefully the same would be said about me. You know, you run into those problems, and you just have to figure out how you're going to beat them. You know, to spend any time wallowing in them would be really be inefficient and not productive. So you got to just say, okay, how are we going to defeat this? And clearly, look, it's a big issue. It's a lot of money that's been cut, and there are a lot of lives that are absolutely directly affected. So how are we going to beat it? And that's what we have to ask ourselves.
That's a really good philosophy on a lot of things.
A lot of things.
All right, what about law as business? We talk to people about that a lot, that law is more business, and it gets that way more and more. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that's a good thing? Is it inevitable?
Well, it is a business. It is inevitable. I think that as lawyers, one of the there are two aspects to that because again, I don't have a typical law firm practice. I practice sports law, but it's not a typical practice. But I think that my take on that would be that lawyers need to understand that they provide value. And they need to not be ashamed of the fact that they provide value. But they also need to understand that they are not the hub of the wheel. You know, they are an important part of the process, but that each lawyer's skills are, while very special, are not necessarily unique. I don't believe for 1 second that my clients couldn't go somewhere else and have someone else negotiate contracts for them. You know, now while I believe that I add value, I don't think that if I died tomorrow, that Andre or Shaquille would retire from their sport because they didn't have anyone to negotiate their deals anymore. So, you know, we're not the hub of the wheel. We're just an important part. I think that we should not be ashamed of the fact that we are a business to make money, and it is a profession. And that profession has a lot of requirements to get into the profession. We should be proud of the fact that we entered into that profession. But we should also be honest with our clients that, you know, we're not doing pro bono work all the time, necessarily. And that our skills have a value and that we should be compensated for it. I think that I don't like the lawyer that says, you know, he's critical to the process. I recently had a lawyer approach me. We're litigating a case, and he said that he would do it, it's a contract case, for a 40% contingency fee. Case. You know, he's not creating value the way Andre is creating value. So I don't like it when I get that from lawyers. And I also feel bad for lawyers that think that, you know, well, I billed you for this, but the truth of it is a good lawyer would bill it in 3. You know, I don't like that either. So, look, you spent 5 hours. Your time is worth money. Just, you know, understand that there's a marketplace for that. And again, it gets back to the marketplace. Acknowledge the marketplace and say, I have to bill you for this. That's fine. Just don't think that we can't do it without you.
Okay, we have two more areas to look at, and we're going to run out of time. I thought we'll do some of the fun stuff, and then we'll just get back to some basic definitions at the end. Does that sound
Okay.
good? The fun stuff being the balance and sort of how do you, well, everybody answers balance, so maybe I'll just let you go with what you think,
Sure.
what you do, and what your life is like. Do you?
Well, I think that you have to ask yourself a basic question. Are you going to live to work or work to live? And you're going to come down on that one way or the other. And you can balance. Once you decide which side you come down on, you can balance that as much as possible. But you're balancing it with an end goal, right? Whether I'm going to live to work or work to live. And, for me, I work to live. I enjoy my work. I have a great time at doing it. But, more interested in raising my children and being a good spouse than I am in doing a good job. And feeling like my self-worth comes from my job. It doesn't. My self-worth comes from actually probably even more so from my kids than it does from my wife even, to be completely candid. It's critical to me that I'm involved in my children's lives. So you have to create rules that create that balance. You don't have to. I mean, that's what I've chosen. For me, I don't go into the office on a weekend. I've done it for years. And it was just after being out of town a long time trying to clear off my desk. The weekends are for my children and me and my wife. That's, really how I've created it. And it's enjoying the time with them. Because I have to travel, as it is. There are enough nights where I'm away from my family. So to balance that out, I make sure that I some predictability.
Do you have some more? Give me some more things you do. Because it's specific is thing. Especially young lawyers who are going to think that they have to be at work constantly, and if they give anything else up, then they're bad people.
Yeah, that would be really sad. Well, I would say that on the side, I'm really involved in my community. I'm the president of Lawn Race Foundation, and I volunteer for that. And it's a lot of work. I 20 hours a week on the foundation, which doesn't pay me a dime. And that's important because my goals can't all be about more. You have to separate that quantitative benefit from the qualitative benefit. And so, each person is going to have the thing that means something to them. What I would tell you is if you don't get involved with it, if you don't care about it and nurture that side of work, you will be left at one point in your office, I guarantee, you will be left at one moment by yourself, looking up from the papers, wondering, why this? And so, to avoid that type of burnout or that lack of purpose, I tell you, find something that you're interested in and put yourself really involved with it. And purpose. Don't join a committee or a board of directors simply because you think that you can network there. About that. And what people so is a opportunity cost. When people they get on board or they get involved with the program so they can network with people, the worst part about it is that they're absolutely hurting their attempting to support because they're taking up a board seat that someone who was about could use and could actually make that they don't want to do. It's that they might do 5 things, but someone else could have done 10. So if you're going to do it,
I'm going to ask you a couple questions about this car family or other activities. Do you think you can do? Should you always do that in
you
your
should
life?
always do it. Because see, there is no there. It doesn't exist. No one walks into your office and says, I'm here to announce you've arrived. It doesn't. It's always a process. It's an iterative process. Is not a whole lot different than the myth of Sisyphus. You push the boulder up the hill, and it comes back. You know, it never goes over the other side. You know, and you have to decide what your life is on the walk down the hill. The work will be there, but we all get that walk back down the hill. You know, the myth of Sisyphus was almost an inept, because Sisyphus got to enjoy the walk back down the hill. I've thought about that a lot, because it is true to enjoy that. He does get to go down, even though he absolutely, and he's subjected to pushing this boulder up. He's not all to do the work, because he gets to walk back down the hill. And we all have those moments. We're not working 24 hours a day. What is our day going to look like? What are we going to fill it with? And if you don't focus on what you'll miss out on it. There. So you've got to start now. You have to start now thinking about what qualities do I want to possess, and how I'm going to create that life.
And for you, what are those?
Well, for me, it's education. The number one that I would like to involve is education. And I knew we started Andre's Foundation, actually. So we were already working.
Explain what that is.
Well, it's the largest athletes foundation in the world. It clothes 3,000 kids so they can go to school every year. It builds a Rose Club, 1,000 square feet in public housing, neighborhood in Las Vegas. It built a charter school. It's been open 6 months. Phenomenal. It's the history of the state of Nevada to have a formal partnership with Harvard. And so, you know, let's go off of your point of when do you start to do these. When we started Andre's Foundation, I got a call from an incredibly powerful, influential person in sports. And it was me picking up the phone. What in the hell are you doing? You start a foundation when they're playing. Do you know how much time this is going to take in your career? Do you know how much you're going to cost him? And I thought, wow, partner, you got it all wrong. You know how much this is going to give him. You know how much this is actually connect the dots for him now. Create an understanding of court. Leverage his partnerships when he can, as opposed to when he can't. You missed the point, not me. And so we went ahead and did the foundation. Now, again, that's when Andre was 23 years old. Everyone was saying, you know, just focus on your tennis. Your analogy of saying, what about when I start my career? You know? And it's even Andre than it would be a year law student, because he's got 10 years to do it. So, but yet at the end of the day, it's a no-brainer. The decision's a no-brainer. You don't get to a point in your life where you can then decide that you just need to decide whether or not you want quality in your life.
If it's speaking that there's a sort of spiritual quality, would you say that? The soul, like it
is.
Sort of. Yeah.
And that's probably part of it all. Probably the most important part of it all is that it has to be more than a bank. There has has to be more. There has to be more perspective than a deal. There has to be more perspective than a number. There has to be more of a goal than a certain point of net worth. Because I can tell you for a fact that there is no there in those things.
But what about the people who say yes, but you have everything? Would you feel that way?
And I'll tell you everything. Because I got a great wife and kids. That's why I've got everything. 1994, we had, Andre had not won the U.S. Open that year. Because I believe this was in August. But he was doing well with his tennis. We had the foundation event. Vegas turned out for it. And a person said to me, "You must be so excited. You've done all these great things." And I said, "I have everything in my life that I don't, and nothing that I do." Because ultimately, those things, but for me, those things create additional, they create opportunities to, and that's the iterative that you've got to always, in my opinion, you do the work to create possibilities, to use those possibilities to make decisions that have meaning.
So give me an example.
You create net worth to then find what vehicle you help or assist. Opportunities for people so that they can create their own meaning.
So it isn't about the house, the boat, that it isn't, it's not, it's about, it's further, it's bigger than...
It's beyond. And the worst thing is getting trapped in that layer, because it's a layer that no end. You'll never keep up with the Joneses. Bill Gates has $65 billion of net worth. You can't beat him. You can't beat him. So you'll never win. Fascinated by the fact that Larry Ellis, 3 years ago, he's not now, but he was the second wealthiest man in the world, and that he hated Bill Gates. That is the most fascinating. That's number two. That's the guy who's second. He's still bothered by the fact that he's not number one. And so you think, okay, well then in that atmosphere, in that layer, other than Gates, there's no victor. Okay, so let's all to Bill Gates. But he must be happy with his $65 billion. There must be meaning from that wealth alone. Well, if that's the case, someone walk me through why he has the largest foundation in the world. Why did he give $26 billion to him? $26 billion. Why is he so in the decision-making of that foundation? Why are they doing such great things? Because it's not at that level. It's past that. They're just tools.
So it seems like is that you can't have that sort of space. It would be material sort of accumulation that you have that, and that people don't really get that part of it. That
I don't know if
or
people,
not.
Yeah.
That sometimes people get stuck
I'm
in
saying
that space.
Yeah, that there's no destination there. It's actually oppressive. Believe it is incredibly oppressive. Because what happens is the opportunities are greater than the wealth that exists. So there's no space there, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a pressure from what you have to what you perception. Your perception. And so it becomes you have to decide at an earlier point what qualities you want to. This is my belief for what actually is going to free people up to allow them to say, I want, as opposed to one is just out of reach.
Right. Doing on time, we're getting that. Okay. One last question.
Uh-huh.
So don't worry about the what makes good. Do we get enough on arbitrator
Um,
and all that kind of
I think
stuff?
so,
We're
yeah,
okay?
yeah.
All right, then we'll just do our last question. We don't have to. Which is, can you describe? First, wait, one more question. Do you? Because this is something that I think, well, really fast. Do you go to the basketball games and the tennis games, and does it get tiring and boring, or do you enjoy your job?
No, I love it. Because I was raised around basketball, but the tennis is near and dear to my heart.
All right, and then it's sort of on that. We've asked this of everyone, and it can be anything, but sort of from the law or your life, or just your life in general. What would you define on that?
Me. My son told me this past weekend that he said, "Daddy, that's not fair." I enjoyed that. He's 2 and he's fairness. My wife just sharing her life with me, which and working with, living next door to my best friend. Really, it's my happy moments.
Well, thank you very much.